Otis Foster, 37, was an Army logistics sergeant whose job was moving supplies across deserts most Americans would never see. Around Fort Riley, people believed he kept choosing deployments over his wife and 2 children. The evidence seemed simple: a quiet man, a worn Ford F-150, and another year overseas. What they didn't know was that Otis had landed in Kansas 6 weeks earlier than anyone expected. When he pushed open his front door, the house echoed. Then his phone played a voicemail from 8-year-old Emma. "Daddy, why didn't you want us anymore? If you're watching from somewhere in the world today, leave your country and local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where everyone is listening from. And if stories about truth, patience, and quiet strength are your kind of stories, consider subscribing." Before 6 weeks earlier, Otis Foster had been standing on a military airfield outside Camp Arif Jan, Kuwait, staring at a row of cargo containers baking under the afternoon sun. The temperature was 109 degrees. Heat shimmered above the concrete. Forklifts moved pallets between transport trucks. The air smelled like diesel fuel and dust. For nearly 11 months, that had been his world. Schedules, manifests, convoys, supply chains, problems that needed solving before they became disasters. Otis was good at it. The Army trusted him because he rarely made mistakes. He wasn't the loud soldier in the room. He wasn't the one telling stories or collecting medals for dramatic heroics. He was the man who made sure everyone else had what they needed. The kind of soldier people forgot about until something went wrong. That morning, a medical officer had handed him paperwork. His shoulder injury wasn't severe, but it required treatment back in the United States. Nothing life-changing, nothing dangerous, just enough to end the deployment early. Most soldiers would have immediately called home. Otis didn't. Not because he wanted secrecy, because he wanted surprise. For months, Emma had been counting down the days until he returned. Every video call included another homemade calendar, another crossed-out square. Another question. "Daddy, are you coming home before my birthday?" Her birthday was still weeks away. If everything worked out, he could walk through the front door and be sitting at the dinner table before she ever expected him. He imagined her face. He imagined Luke pretending not to be excited. At 11 years old, Luke had reached that age where he tried acting tougher than he really was. Otis missed that. He missed ordinary things. School pickups, Saturday fishing trips, pancakes on Sunday mornings, the small pieces of life most people never noticed until they disappeared. The flight from Kuwait to Germany lasted nearly 6 hours. The flight from Germany to Atlanta lasted nearly 10. By the time Otis landed stateside, he felt exhausted enough to sleep for a week. But excitement kept him moving. He bought gifts during the layover: a baseball glove for Luke, an art set for Emma, a silver bracelet for Megan. Nothing extravagant, just reminders that he'd been thinking about them every day. The bracelet sat inside his carry-on bag, wrapped in blue paper, still unopened. The final flight carried him into Kansas. As the plane descended toward Manhattan Regional Airport, patchwork fields stretched across the landscape. Green, gold, familiar, home. For the first time in nearly a year, Otis felt his shoulders relax. Not because the deployment was over, because he was finally close enough to touch the life he'd spent months imagining. The airport was quiet. A handful of travelers moved through baggage claim. Nobody recognized him. Nobody waited with signs. That was exactly how he wanted it. He grabbed his duffel bag and stepped outside. The late afternoon air felt cooler than anything he'd experienced in Kuwait. A taxi driver helped load his gear. "Fort Riley?" the driver asked. Otis nodded. The man smiled. "Coming home?" "Yeah." The driver glanced at the uniform. "Bet your family's excited." Otis smiled slightly. "I hope so." The ride took less than 20 minutes. They passed familiar roads, gas stations, restaurants, the Walmart where Megan always insisted on stopping for things they didn't need. Everything looked exactly the same. until they reached his neighborhood. Then something felt wrong. Not dramatically wrong, just enough to catch attention. The street seemed quieter, a little too quiet. The house across from his own had a new truck parked outside. The Henderson family's basketball hoop was gone. Small changes, normal changes. Yet Otis noticed them immediately. Military deployments trained people to notice details. The taxi pulled to the curb. His house stood exactly where it always had. White siding, small front porch, American flag hanging near the garage. The porch light was on, even though daylight remained. Otis paid the driver, grabbed his bags, walked toward the house. Then he noticed someone watching. Mrs. Patterson, the retired schoolteacher who lived next door. She stood beside her mailbox. For a second she simply stared, as if she wasn't sure she was seeing the right person. "Otis," he smiled. "Aye, Mrs. Patterson." Her expression changed. Not happiness, confusion, the kind that arrives when reality doesn't match expectations. "Oh, my goodness," she said. You're back. Got home early." She looked at the house, then back at him. The silence lasted a little too long. Something tightened inside Otis. "Everything okay?" he asked. Mrs. Patterson hesitated. "Otis." She stopped, started again. "I thought you knew." The words landed strangely. "Knew what?" She shifted uncomfortably. "The moving truck." His smile faded. "What moving truck?" "The one from last week." A pause. "Your wife moved out." The neighborhood suddenly felt very still. No birds, no distant traffic, nothing. Just those 4 words. Your wife moved out. Otis blinked. "What?" Mrs. Patterson looked genuinely distressed. "I assumed she told you." "When?" "About 9 days ago." 9 days. Otis had spoken to Megan 12 days ago. They'd discussed Emma's upcoming birthday, Luke's baseball season, the dishwasher that needed repairs. Nothing about moving. Nothing about leaving. Nothing about taking their children somewhere else. "Where did she go?" he asked. "I don't know." Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "She didn't say." Otis stood motionless. His duffel bag suddenly felt heavier. A cold sensation spread through his chest. Not panic, not yet. Just confusion. Because none of it made sense. Megan wasn't impulsive. She planned things, organized things, made lists for other lists. People like that didn't disappear overnight. "Maybe there's an explanation," Mrs. Patterson offered quietly. Otis nodded, but he barely heard her. He turned toward the house. The front door key still fit. The lock clicked. The door opened. Silence greeted him. Not the comfortable silence of an empty house, a different kind, a hollow kind. The living room looked wrong immediately. The family photographs were gone. The bookshelf looked half empty. Several pieces of furniture had disappeared. A lamp, a side table, the rug beneath the coffee table. Otis walked farther inside. Every room told the same story. Not abandonment, preparation, planning, removal. The master bedroom closet was almost empty. Megan's clothes were gone. The dresser drawers sat open, cleaned out. The children's rooms hit hardest. Luke's baseball trophies. Gone. Emma's stuffed animals. Gone. Posters removed from walls. Beds stripped. The rooms looked like model homes waiting for buyers. No signs children had ever lived there. Otis stood in Emma's doorway. Months earlier she'd shown him a drawing over video chat. A rainbow. Their family. A giant dog she'd begged for. The drawing had hung beside her bed. Now even the tape was gone. Someone had taken time to remove everything. Methodically. Carefully. Deliberately. Otis moved through the house one room at a time, searching, looking for answers. Eventually he reached the kitchen counter. A single folder sat there, waiting, the only thing left behind. He opened it. Inside were school transfer documents, enrollment paperwork, new student records, 2 names: Luke Foster, Emma Foster. And at the top of the page, one word caught his attention: Wichita, nearly 2 hours away. His jaw tightened. Then he saw something else, a signature. His signature. Supposedly approving the transfer. Otis stared at it. Every instinct told him the same thing. He had never signed that document, never even seen it. The silence inside the house suddenly felt much louder. And for the first time since stepping off the plane, Otis realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had been preparing this for a long time. And whatever he thought was waiting for him at home had disappeared long before he landed. Otis Foster slept less than 2 hours that night. Not because he wanted answers immediately, because every answer he found created 3 more questions. The school transfer documents remained spread across the kitchen table. He had examined them repeatedly. The forms looked official: district letterhead, enrollment records, emergency contact information. Everything appeared legitimate. Except for one thing: the signature. His signature. The longer he studied it, the more obvious the differences became. The shape was close. The style was similar. But it wasn't his. Someone had practiced. Someone had copied it enough times to fool people who weren't looking closely. Otis spent years signing military paperwork. Thousands of pages. Travel forms. Equipment logs. Training certifications. He knew exactly how he wrote his name. This wasn't it. At 6:30 the next morning, he was already driving toward Riley Creek Elementary School. The school sat on the eastern side of Manhattan, Kansas, a familiar red brick building surrounded by playground equipment and athletic fields. Luke had attended there for 4 years, Emma for 2. Otis had volunteered at field days when he was home. He had attended parent-teacher conferences, fundraisers, school carnivals. People there knew him, or at least they used to. The parking lot was half full when he arrived. Parents walked children toward the entrance. Teachers greeted students near the doors. Life continued normally, as if his family hadn't disappeared. Otis entered the administration office. The receptionist looked up. Her smile appeared automatically, then vanished. Recognition crossed her face. Not friendly recognition. Something closer to discomfort. "Mr. Foster?" Otis noticed it immediately. The hesitation, the careful tone. "Good morning," he said. "I need to speak with someone regarding my children's records." The receptionist glanced toward another office. "One moment." She disappeared. Several minutes later, Assistant Principal Karen Delaney emerged. Mid-50s, professional, polite, and visibly surprised. "Mr. Foster." "Miss Delaney." She folded her arms. "Can we talk in my office?" Otis followed her down a hallway. The office door closed behind them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Karen sighed. "I honestly didn't expect to see you." That sentence landed oddly. "Why?" She hesitated. The answer was obvious, because she believed the story, whatever story she'd been told. Karen sat behind her desk. "We were informed you were still overseas." "I was." "Mrs. Foster said you extended your deployment." Otis remained silent. Karen continued. "She said your military career had become your priority." The words felt rehearsed, repeated many times, shared enough that they had become accepted truth. Otis leaned slightly forward. "What exactly did Megan tell you?" Karen's expression tightened, as if she suddenly realized she might be discussing something she shouldn't. Still, she answered. "She said you chose another overseas assignment." "She said the separation had been happening for a long time." She said the children needed stability. Otis listened without interruption. Years in the Army taught him something valuable. People reveal more when they don't feel challenged. Karen kept talking. She said the kids were struggling. Especially Emma. Otis stared at a framed photograph hanging behind her desk. Anything to keep emotion from reaching his face. Emma, 8 years old, still sleeping with a stuffed rabbit, still asking if clouds could hold people, still drawing family pictures every week. And somebody had told her he didn't want to come home. What else? He asked quietly. Karen looked uncomfortable. Mr. Foster. What else? Another pause. Then she answered. She said you voluntarily chose the Army over your family. The room became very quiet. Otis lowered his eyes briefly. Not because he was hurt, because he needed control. Anger would accomplish nothing. Facts mattered. Evidence mattered. Emotions could wait. When did she tell you this? Karen opened a file. Several weeks ago. Several weeks, which meant Megan had been building this story before he ever landed in Kansas, possibly before his deployment even ended. The realization settled heavily inside him. This wasn't a sudden decision. This was preparation, planning, a campaign. Otis nodded toward the transfer paperwork. I need copies of everything. Karen blinked. Everything? Every document related to my children transferring schools? The assistant principal looked uncertain. You already signed. No. The word arrived calm, firm, definite. I did not. Karen stopped speaking. Otis reached into his backpack, removed military travel records, boarding passes, deployment orders. He laid them across her desk. Karen glanced down, then back up. Confusion replaced certainty. The signature on those forms isn't mine. The assistant principal stared at the documents. Her expression slowly changed. The certainty she carried into the room began to disappear. You're saying... I'm saying I was in Kuwait. He pointed to a date. The transfer paperwork was signed on May 4th. Another document. My unit logged me into a supply inspection on May 4th. Another. A military flight manifest shows I was still overseas. Karen's eyes widened. For the first time since entering the office, she looked genuinely concerned. Not for herself, for the situation. Because now she realized there were two very different stories, and one of them wasn't matching the evidence. Can I see the originals? Otis asked. Karen nodded slowly. She left the office, returned several minutes later carrying a folder. Otis opened it. Carefully, methodically. Every page received attention. Emergency contact forms, withdrawal requests, transfer authorization paperwork, medical records, transportation records. Then he found another signature. And another, and another. His name appeared multiple times, each one slightly different, each one wrong. The pattern became obvious. Someone hadn't forged his signature once. Someone had forged it repeatedly. Karen sat silently across from him, watching. The atmosphere inside the office had changed completely. She no longer viewed him as an absent father. She viewed him as someone uncovering a problem, a serious one. Where did they transfer? Otis asked. Wichita. What school? Karen checked another page. Prairie Hills Elementary. Nearly 2 hours away. Far enough to make regular visitation difficult. Far enough to isolate the children from everyone they knew. Friends, teachers, neighbors, community, everything. Otis requested copies of every document. Karen agreed immediately. The printer ran for several minutes, page after page. Evidence, paper trails, dates, signatures, details. The kind of information people overlooked when emotions controlled a situation. Before leaving, Karen stopped him near the door. "Mr. Foster." He turned. Her voice sounded softer now, more uncertain. "If what you're saying is true—" She stopped, then tried again. "I'm sorry." Otis studied her expression. She meant it. Not because she knew the whole truth, because she realized she had judged him, like everyone else, based on a story. He nodded once. "Thank you." Then he left. Outside, children laughed on the playground. Teachers supervised recess. The ordinary sounds felt strangely distant. Otis sat inside his truck. The folder rested on the passenger seat. The evidence was growing. But so was the picture. And the picture looked worse every hour. He started the engine. Then his phone vibrated. A text message. Unknown number. No greeting. No explanation. Just one sentence. "You should stop looking before you make things harder on yourself." Otis read it twice. Then a third time. The sender remained unidentified. No signature. No name. Nothing. Most people would have felt intimidated. Otis felt something different. Confirmation. Because innocent people rarely send warnings. He placed the phone down, started the truck, and drove away. For the first time since coming home, he wasn't wondering whether something was wrong. He knew something was wrong. The only question now was how far it went, and who was helping Megan hide it. Otis Foster had always believed numbers told the truth. People lied. People exaggerated. People forgot details. Bank statements didn't. Receipts didn't. Transaction histories didn't. The morning after visiting Riley Creek Elementary, he sat inside the branch office of Flint Hills Credit Union in Manhattan, Kansas. The building was small. Red brick outside. Muted blue carpet inside. The same bank he and Megan had used since their second year of marriage. The same bank where they opened savings accounts for Luke and Emma. The same bank where every deployment paycheck had been deposited. A young employee led him into a private office. A branch manager named Greg Simmons joined him minutes later. Greg was in his early 50s. Gray hair, reading glasses, friendly face. The type of man who remembered customers. "Good to see you back home, Sergeant Foster." Otis nodded. "Thanks." Greg noticed the folder under his arm. Immediately his smile faded slightly. "What can I help you with?" Otis slid identification across the desk. "I need complete account records." Greg studied him for a second, then nodded. "Joint accounts. All of them." No explanation followed. None was necessary. After a few minutes of verification, Greg returned with printed statements. A thick stack, nearly an inch tall. Otis began turning pages. Quietly. Methodically. The same way he reviewed supply manifests overseas. Line by line. Date by date. Transaction by transaction. At first nothing seemed unusual. Mortgage payments, utilities, insurance, groceries, normal life. Then the pattern changed, around 4 months earlier. Large withdrawals started appearing. Not one. Several. $3,000, $4,000, $2,500. The amounts were large enough to notice, small enough to avoid immediate alarms. Otis continued reading. Furniture stores in Wichita, home decor retailers, electronic purchases, hotel reservations, restaurants, more restaurants, a luxury steakhouse, a downtown cocktail bar, places he had never visited, places Megan had never mentioned. His eyes narrowed. Then he reached the children's college savings accounts, the accounts that mattered most. Years earlier, he and Megan agreed on one thing. No matter what happened financially, those accounts remained untouched. Every deployment, every overtime shift, every tax refund. Money went there, not because they were wealthy, because they wanted opportunities for Luke and Emma. Otis turned the page, then another. The balance dropped sharply. His jaw tightened. Nearly 70% of the savings was gone, withdrawn, transferred, moved elsewhere. He checked again. The numbers remained the same. Luke's account, reduced. Emma's account, reduced. The transfers led to another account, an account carrying only Megan's name. Greg watched quietly. Years in banking had taught him when not to interrupt. Finally, he spoke. "Mr. Foster," Otis looked up. Greg lowered his voice. "Would you like copies of everything?" "Yes. All of it. Everything." Greg nodded. No questions. No assumptions. Only paperwork. An hour later, Otis walked out carrying another folder. The evidence pile continued growing. School documents, forged signatures, bank transfers, missing savings, each piece connected to another, like sections of a bridge slowly coming together, still incomplete, but recognizable. Someone wasn't merely leaving a marriage. Someone was preparing a narrative and funding it. The next stop sat inside Fort Riley, a modest legal assistance office near the administrative complex. Captain Rachel Monroe worked there. 41 years old. Former Army prosecutor. Sharp reputation. Few wasted words. Exactly the type of person Otis trusted. The receptionist guided him into her office. Rachel reviewed the documents without speaking. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. She continued reading, occasionally making notes, occasionally marking pages with colored tabs. Finally, she leaned back. "What have you done so far?" Otis summarized everything. The empty house, the school, the signatures, the bank records, the anonymous text message. Rachel listened carefully. No interruptions. When he finished, she folded her hands. "First question." Otis waited. "Have you confronted your wife?" "No." "Good." Rachel nodded once. "Do not." Otis expected that answer. Still, he wanted to hear her reasoning. "Why?" Rachel slid a document across her desk. "The moment people know they're under scrutiny, evidence starts disappearing." She tapped the paper. "Emails disappear. Phones get replaced. Stories change. Memories become selective." Otis understood immediately. Military investigations worked the same way. Rachel continued. "Right now, Megan thinks she's controlling the narrative. That's useful. Let her keep believing that." Otis looked toward the bank records. "She moved money." Rachel nodded. "I saw." "She forged signatures." "Looks that way." "She told people I abandoned my kids." Rachel met his eyes. "Which is exactly why emotions can't drive this." The office became quiet. Rachel wasn't offering comfort. She was offering strategy. Those were different things. "You have something many people don't have," she said. "What?" "Documentation." Rachel pointed toward his deployment records. "You were in Kuwait." "Not approximately." "Not probably." "Exactly." She opened another folder. Military travel manifests, personnel logs, duty records. The Army documents everything. She tapped a date. "If someone claims you signed paperwork in Kansas while you were performing inventory inspections in Kuwait, that's a problem for them." Not for him. For them. The distinction mattered. Rachel continued organizing documents into categories: school records, financial records, military records, potential witnesses, communication history. By the time she finished, the chaos looked almost organized, almost manageable. "Next step," Otis asked. Rachel opened a notepad. "Find where the children are living. Legally. Not assumptions. Not rumors. Addresses. Records. Verification. She wrote something down, then tore off the page. An address. Wichita, apartment complex, building number, unit number. Otis stared at it. "Where did you get this?" Rachel shrugged slightly. "Military spouses leave trails." Apparently, Megan had recently updated dependent information connected to insurance documentation. Not enough to expose everything. Enough to locate her. The address sat less than 2 inches from his hand. For a moment, he imagined driving there immediately, knocking on the door, demanding answers, seeing Luke and Emma. Rachel seemed to read his thoughts. "Don't do anything stupid." Otis almost smiled. "Define stupid." "Anything emotional." That answer felt accurate. Rachel stood, walked toward a filing cabinet, returned carrying a business card. "Family attorney." Otis read the name. Daniel Brooks, Wichita, family law specialist. "Good," Rachel nodded. "Very." She paused, then added something important. "Otis." He looked up. "You're approaching this like a husband." The statement surprised him. Rachel continued. "You need to approach it like an investigator." Silence followed, because he knew she was right. A hurt husband wanted explanations. A father needed evidence. Those were not the same thing. He slipped the business card into his wallet, gathered the folders, prepared to leave. Then Rachel stopped him one final time. "One more thing. What? Assume you're not the only person keeping records." The words lingered. "What do you mean?" Rachel leaned against her desk. "If someone planned this for months..." She glanced toward the forged documents. "They probably planned more than you found." Otis thought about the anonymous text message, the forged signatures, the school transfers, the money. She was right. This operation felt too organized to be impulsive, too coordinated, too careful. There were still pieces missing, people missing, names missing. As he left Fort Riley that afternoon, the address remained folded inside his pocket. Wichita. 2 hours away. His children were there. Somewhere behind that address. Somewhere behind the lies. And for the first time since returning home, Otis finally had a destination. What he didn't know was that the address would reveal far more than where Megan had gone. It would reveal who she had gone there with. The drive from Fort Riley to Wichita took a little under 2 hours. Otis Foster left before sunrise. The highway stretched across Kansas farmland in long, quiet miles. Fields, wind turbines, grain silos, the kind of landscape that made distances feel larger than they really were. A week earlier, he would have spent the drive thinking about his family. Now he spent it reviewing evidence. School transfer records, bank statements, deployment logs. Every piece sat neatly organized inside a black folder on the passenger seat. Rachel Monroe's advice stayed in his head. Don't think like a husband. Think like an investigator. By the time the Wichita skyline appeared in the distance, Otis had repeated those words enough times to believe them. The apartment complex sat on the eastern side of the city. A newer development. 3-story buildings, fresh landscaping, covered parking, not luxurious, not cheap either. The sort of place a person chose when they wanted a clean start. Otis parked across the street beside a small public park, far enough away not to attract attention, close enough to observe. The address matched. Building C, Unit 214. He checked the information twice, then settled in. Military deployments taught patience. Hours of waiting, hours of watching, hours of gathering information before acting. That skill served him well now. At 8:17 a.m., a silver SUV left the parking lot. A woman drove. For 1 second, he thought it might be Megan. It wasn't. At 8:54, a maintenance worker entered the building. At 9:30, a delivery truck arrived. Nothing unusual, nothing useful, Otis remained still, watching, recording, taking notes. By noon he had learned 3 things. First, the apartment was occupied. Second, someone appeared careful about schedules. Third, whoever lived there rarely left during normal work hours. Interesting. At 1:12 p.m., a black BMW entered the complex. The vehicle immediately caught his attention, not because of the car itself, because he recognized the driver, Tyler Vaughn. For a moment, Otis simply stared. His expression didn't change. His pulse did. Tyler climbed out carrying a coffee tray. Casual, comfortable, at home. The same Tyler who appeared occasionally during video calls while Otis was deployed. The same Tyler Megan described as a helpful neighbor. The same Tyler who supposedly fixed a leaking faucet one weekend. Helped move furniture another. Checked on the family while Otis was overseas. At least that was the story. Now Tyler used a key to enter Building C. No hesitation. No knocking. No waiting. A key. Otis watched him disappear inside. Then he wrote down the time. 1:12 p.m. Entry using personal key. No emotion, just documentation. The temptation to walk over immediately appeared. Strong, instant, human. But temptation wasn't evidence. Evidence mattered. He remained where he was. 27 minutes later, movement appeared on the second-floor balcony. Megan. She stepped outside holding a coffee mug. Wearing casual clothes, hair tied back, relaxed, comfortable. Not the appearance of someone struggling after a difficult separation. Not the appearance of someone abandoned. Otis studied her carefully. Months overseas had prepared him for many things. Seeing his wife standing on another man's balcony wasn't one of them. Yet, he felt surprisingly calm, not because it didn't hurt, because the hurt had already happened. The empty house, Emma's voicemail, the forged signatures, those wounds came first. This was simply another fact, another piece of a larger picture. Megan smiled at someone inside, then disappeared back into the apartment. Several minutes later, Tyler joined her on the balcony. They laughed about something. Otis couldn't hear the conversation. He didn't need to. Body language told enough. Familiarity, comfort, routine. This wasn't new. This wasn't recent. This was established. A relationship that existed long before the moving truck arrived in Manhattan. The realization settled heavily inside him. For nearly a year, while he managed military logistics overseas, another man had been slowly entering his family. Not through force, not through confrontation, through access, through trust, through proximity. The afternoon passed slowly. At 3:24 p.m., something finally happened. A school bus stopped near the entrance. Children exited. Parents waited nearby. Otis sat forward slightly. Then he saw them. Luke, Emma. The breath caught briefly in his chest. Neither child looked injured. Neither looked neglected. That mattered. But they looked different. Luke had grown taller. His hair was longer, his shoulders slightly broader. Emma carried a backpack nearly half her size. A pink one. New. Neither child smiled much. They walked toward Building C. Emma talking. Luke listening. Ordinary. Beautiful. Painful. Otis remained inside the truck. Every instinct wanted movement. Every instinct wanted contact. He hadn't seen them in 11 months, hadn't hugged them, hadn't heard their voices in person. But Rachel's warning echoed again. Don't act emotionally. Observe. Document. Think. So he watched. Luke entered the building first. Emma followed. Then something unexpected happened. Halfway through the doorway, Emma turned. just for a second. Her eyes scanned the parking area, the street, the park. Randomly, or maybe not. Then her gaze landed directly on his truck. Otis froze. The distance was significant, nearly 100 yards. Yet something changed in her expression. Confusion, recognition, hope, all appearing within a heartbeat. Emma stopped walking. Luke continued inside. She didn't. The little girl stood perfectly still, looking across the street, looking at the windshield, looking at him. Otis felt his chest tighten. Children recognized people differently, not through logic, through instinct, through familiarity, through memory. Emma took a small step forward, then another, as if she wasn't entirely sure what she was seeing. A woman emerged from the building behind her. "Megan." She said something. Emma didn't answer immediately. Still staring, still looking toward the truck. Megan followed her gaze. For 1 second, the world seemed to stop. The distance prevented Otis from seeing details, but he saw enough. Megan's body stiffened. Her head turned sharply, toward the park, toward the truck, toward him. Recognition happened instantly, even across a parking lot, even after 11 months. Otis watched her grab Emma's shoulder. Not aggressively, not violently, quickly, protectively, the way someone reacts when a situation changes unexpectedly. Emma continued looking. Megan said something else, this time firmer. Luke appeared again. The children entered the building. The door closed. And just like that, the moment ended. Otis remained motionless. The apartment building stood quiet once more. No confrontation, no shouting, no dramatic scene. Only a brief exchange of glances across a parking lot. Yet the implications were enormous, because now Megan knew something she hadn't known that morning. Otis wasn't overseas. He wasn't thousands of miles away. He wasn't operating from phone calls and paperwork. He was here, in Kansas, close enough to see, close enough to verify, close enough to challenge the story she had built. A few minutes later, his phone vibrated. Unknown number. Again. This time, the message contained only 4 words. Leave Wichita. Today. Otis stared at the screen, then at the apartment building, then back at the phone. No greeting, no explanation, no signature. Someone knew he was there. Someone had seen him, which meant his presence had already created fear. He saved the message, added it to the evidence folder, then started the truck. Not because he intended to leave, because he intended to prepare. The game had changed. Until now he had been gathering facts quietly. Now the people on the other side knew he was gathering them. And that usually meant mistakes were coming. The question was who would make the first one. Otis Foster expected lawyers. He expected court filings. He expected accusations. What he didn't expect was how difficult it would be to see his own children. Not legally, emotionally. For 2 days after the encounter outside the apartment complex, he stayed away. Not because he wanted distance, because he needed a plan. A bad decision could become evidence against him. A confrontation could become a police report. A police report could become a custody issue. Daniel Brooks. The family attorney, Rachel Monroe, made that clear during their first meeting. Daniel's office occupied the 3rd floor of an old brick building near downtown Wichita. The lawyer looked exactly like someone who spent 25 years arguing in court. Silver hair, sharp suit, sharp eyes. Nothing escaped his attention. After reviewing the documents, Daniel leaned back in his chair. "You have a stronger case than you realize." Otis didn't look relieved. Daniel noticed. "What's bothering you, my kids?" The answer came immediately. Not the money, Not Megan, not Tyler, the children. Daniel nodded. Of course. He flipped through several pages. Have you spoken to them? No. Have they spoken to you, Key? Not since I got back. Daniel considered that. Then he closed the folder. Children don't process lies the same way adults do. Otis waited. Daniel continued. If they've been told something repeatedly for months, it becomes reality. The words stayed with him. Reality. Not truth. Reality. Those weren't always the same thing. The lawyer slid a notepad across the desk. What do you want right now? The answer took less than a second. I want my children to know I didn't leave them. Daniel nodded. Then that's your first objective. Not winning, not revenge, not exposing Megan, the children. Always the children. The meeting ended with legal strategies, documentation, future filings, evidence preservation, necessary steps. But Otis left thinking about only one thing. Luke and Emma believed a lie. And every day that lie remained unchallenged, it became stronger. 3 days later, an opportunity appeared. Unexpectedly, a mutual acquaintance from Manhattan contacted him. A woman named Cheryl Banks, former PTA volunteer, friend of both families, someone Luke and Emma trusted. She had recently moved to Wichita. When she learned Otis was back, she called immediately. What happened? She asked. Otis gave a careful version. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional, just facts. Cheryl listened quietly, then she said something important. The kids miss you. The sentence hit harder than expected. How do you know? I saw them at Riverside Park last weekend. She hesitated. Emma asked if soldiers can quit being dads. Silence followed. Otis looked out the windshield of his truck. Traffic moved through downtown Wichita. People continued their lives. Somewhere nearby, his daughter was asking questions like that. Questions no child should ever have to ask. Cheryl spoke again. I'm helping with a community event Saturday. Both kids will be there, Otis understood immediately. She wasn't offering guarantees. She wasn't arranging anything inappropriate. She was giving him information. The rest would be his choice. Saturday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures. Riverside Park filled with families. Children played soccer. Food trucks lined the parking area. Music drifted from portable speakers. Normal life. Otis arrived early, wearing jeans, a gray polo shirt, no uniform, no military identifiers, nothing that might make the moment feel larger than it needed to be. He waited near the river, watching people, watching families, watching children run through open grass. At 11:17 a.m. he saw them, Luke first, then Emma. The reaction surprised him, not because of what he felt, because of how much it hurt. They looked so familiar, and so distant. Luke had grown taller, nearly to Megan's shoulder now. Emma's hair was longer than before. Both carried traces of the children he remembered, and traces of strangers. Months had passed. Life had continued without him. The realization stung. They didn't notice him immediately. That was probably for the best. Otis remained seated on a bench, patient, calm. Eventually, Emma turned. The recognition happened instantly. Her small body froze. Her eyes widened. Dad! The word barely reached him, yet he heard it clearly. Luke turned next. The older child's reaction differed. Less emotion, more uncertainty, more caution. Emma started running, then stopped halfway, as if she suddenly remembered something. Something she'd been told, something she wasn't sure about. Otis stood, slowly. No sudden movement, no pressure, no demands. Hey, Em! The little girl stared, tears already forming. Daddy. This time the word sounded smaller, more fragile. Otis nodded. I'm here. Emma looked behind her, toward Luke, toward the adults nearby, toward the world that had spent months explaining why her father wasn't around. Then she took off running. The impact nearly knocked the breath from his lungs. Small arms wrapped around him, tight, desperate. Otis closed his eyes briefly. One hand rested against her back, the other against her hair. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Luke approached more slowly, guarded, watching, evaluating, like a young man trying to decide what was true. Otis understood immediately. Emma wanted reassurance. Luke wanted answers. The difference mattered. Hey, buddy. Luke stopped several feet away. Hi. Not cold, not warm. Careful. The conversation remained awkward at first. Small topics, school, baseball, friends, normal things. Emma relaxed quickly. Luke didn't. Every answer seemed measured, every smile incomplete. Finally, the boy asked the question. The real question. The one waiting underneath everything else. Why didn't you come home? Silence settled over the bench. Children played nearby. A dog barked somewhere across the park. The world kept moving. But for Luke, everything depended on the answer. Otis didn't rush. Didn't defend himself. Didn't attack Megan. He reached into his backpack, pulled out several documents, carefully folded. Military paperwork, travel records, flight confirmations. Luke looked confused. What is that? The day I came home? The boy stared. Otis pointed to a date, then another, then another. I didn't stay overseas. Luke frowned. But Mom said, I know. The interruption remained gentle. Not angry, not bitter, just honest. I know what she said. Luke looked down at the paperwork, then back at his father, then back again. Children recognize sincerity faster than adults. They don't always understand evidence, but they understand behavior. And Otis wasn't behaving like someone caught in a lie. Emma wiped her eyes. You were coming home for my birthday. Otis smiled slightly. Actually, I was supposed to surprise you. She looked shocked, then confused, then emotional again. Luke remained quiet, thinking, processing, comparing two versions of reality. Finally, he spoke, softly, almost reluctantly. Mom said you signed papers. Otis felt something shift inside him. Not anger, confirmation. What papers? Luke looked uncomfortable. The papers giving us to her? The word sounded strange coming from an 11-year-old, as if he'd repeated something he barely understood. Otis remained perfectly still. What exactly did she tell you? Luke swallowed, then answered. She said you agreed she should raise us. The river flowed quietly behind them. Emma stared at the ground, and for the first time Otis understood how deep the deception really went. This wasn't only about leaving. This wasn't only about abandonment. Someone had convinced his children that he willingly gave them away. The drive back from Riverside Park felt longer than it should have, not because of traffic, not because of distance, because Luke's words stayed with Otis Foster the entire way. She said you signed papers. She said you agreed she should raise us. Most people would have focused on the betrayal. Otis focused on the details. Children rarely invented explanations like that. They repeated them, which meant somewhere somehow documents existed. Documents that had been shown to Luke. Documents that had been described to Emma. Documents carrying his name. The same pattern appeared again. Paper. Signatures. Authority. Someone was using paperwork to make lies look official. By Monday morning, Otis sat across from Daniel Brooks in his Wichita office. A fresh stack of documents covered the conference table. Daniel listened carefully as Otis described the conversation with the children. The attorney didn't interrupt, didn't react emotionally. He simply took notes. When Otis finished, Daniel leaned back. "They've been coached." Otis looked up. Daniel continued. "Not necessarily rehearsed, but coached." The distinction mattered. Children repeated information they believed, especially information delivered by a trusted parent. Luke wasn't lying. Emma wasn't lying. They were repeating a narrative. Daniel tapped the table. "The interesting part is the wording." "What wording?" "You signed papers." The attorney slid several documents forward. Children don't naturally talk like that. Otis immediately understood. An 11-year-old didn't invent legal language. Someone had deliberately introduced the concept. Someone wanted the children to believe official documents existed. Daniel opened another folder. Inside were copies of every record Otis had collected. School transfers, address changes, medical authorizations, emergency contact updates. Each one carried a version of his signature. Daniel organized them side by side. The similarities became obvious. The differences did too. "Look here," he pointed. "Different pressure." Another page. "Different angle." Another. "The letters don't connect the same way." Otis nodded. He saw it. The signatures looked convincing from a distance, not under examination. Daniel folded his hands. "Here's what concerns me." The attorney paused. "We found forged signatures in school records. We found them in address changes. We found them in educational transfers." He tapped another document. "If the same pattern exists elsewhere, this becomes much bigger." Otis understood immediately. Banking, housing, legal filings, medical records, anything requiring authorization, anything requiring consent, anything requiring a signature. Daniel continued. "I want access to everything." Everything. Everything. The attorney's voice remained calm. "Apartment leases, custody filings, insurance changes, financial transfers, every document your name appears on." Otis nodded. The investigation was expanding, not emotionally, methodically, like pulling a thread from a sweater. The more they pulled, the more appeared. 3 days later, the first major discovery arrived. Daniel called shortly after noon. "Get to my office." No explanation, no details, just urgency. When Otis arrived, several folders already covered the conference table. Daniel stood beside them. For the first time since they'd met, the attorney looked genuinely surprised. "You're going to want to see this." Otis sat. Daniel opened the first folder. Apartment lease agreement. Building C, Unit 214. The apartment where Megan lived. The apartment where Tyler used a key. The apartment where Luke and Emma now slept. Daniel pointed toward a signature line. Otis looked. His name appeared. Again. Not just Megan's. Both names. Joint approval. Joint occupancy acknowledgement. Joint financial responsibility. Otis stared silently. "I've never seen this." "I know." Daniel flipped another page. Move-in authorization. His name again. Another page. Emergency contact form. His name again. Another. School transportation authorization. His name. Everywhere. Like a ghost participating in decisions he'd never made. The attorney slid another document across the table. This one stopped even him. Temporary separation declaration. Signed. Dated. Notarized. Otis felt the room become very quiet. The document claimed both parties voluntarily agreed to separate. The document claimed both parties understood the children's relocation. The document claimed both parties approved temporary custody arrangements. Every statement was false, every signature fraudulent, and yet the paperwork looked legitimate, professional, official, dangerously convincing. Daniel leaned forward. This is where the situation changes. Otis looked up. How? The attorney pointed toward the bottom of the page. A notary seal, name, registration number, expiration date. Everything appeared valid. Susan Keller. Otis read the name. Who's that? The notary. Daniel sat back. If this document was properly notarized, then someone supposedly witnessed your signature. Silence followed. Because both men understood the implication, a notary's job wasn't decorative. It existed to verify identity, to confirm signatures, to prevent fraud. Yet Otis had been thousands of miles away, meaning one of two things happened. Either Susan Keller never saw him, or Susan Keller knowingly approved a fraudulent document. Neither option looked good. Daniel opened another file. More notarized paperwork. Another signature. Another seal. Same name. Susan Keller. Again, and again, and again. A pattern emerged quickly. The most important documents all shared one thing: the same notary, the same approval, the same witness, the same impossible timeline. Otis studied the dates: May 4th, May 11th, May 19th. During every one of those days, military records placed him in Kuwait. Not approximately, not generally. Specifically, exact locations, exact times, exact duties. Army documentation left little room for doubt. Daniel slid another packet across the table. Deployment records, travel logs, military attendance reports. Everything aligned perfectly. If this reaches court, Daniel said quietly, their timeline collapses. Otis nodded, yet something still bothered him. One question, one missing piece. Tyler. Daniel looked up. What about him? He's involved. The statement wasn't emotional. It was observational. Tyler had a key. Tyler lived there. Tyler benefited. Tyler appeared repeatedly around critical events. The attorney considered that, then opened another folder, this time containing public records, property transactions, business registrations, professional licenses, information available to anyone willing to look. Tyler Vaughn worked as a real estate agent. Licensed for nearly 12 years, moderately successful, several local investments. Nothing extraordinary, nothing alarming. Until Daniel pointed toward a familiar address, the apartment complex. Tyler's name appeared connected to ownership interests through a management partnership. Otis stared. So he helped secure the apartment. Looks that way. And benefited financially. Possibly. The attorney closed the folder. The more we learn, the more this stops looking accidental. The observation felt accurate. One forged document could be desperation. Several forged documents became strategy. An entire collection became planning. The office remained quiet for several seconds. Then Daniel said something unexpected. There's another issue. Otis waited. The attorney slid one final document across the table. Court filing paperwork. Recent. Official. Fresh. Otis immediately recognized Megan's name. Then he saw the title. Emergency Custody Petition. His eyes narrowed. The filing date was only 3 days old. After Riverside Park. After Emma recognized him. After Megan realized he was back. Daniel spoke carefully. She moved first. The words carried weight. Strategic weight. Not emotional weight. Megan had realized control was slipping. So she escalated. The petition claimed instability, emotional absence, parental abandonment, a pattern of choosing military service over family responsibilities. Every accusation mirrored the story already told to schools and children. Now it appeared inside official court documents. Daniel exhaled slowly. They're trying to establish a legal version of the same narrative. Otis looked down at the paperwork. Not surprised. Not anymore. Only focused. The lies were becoming larger, which also meant they were becoming harder to maintain. Eventually, every false story required supporting evidence, and evidence left trails, signatures, dates, records, witnesses, people. Somewhere among those people sat Susan Keller, the notary, the woman whose name appeared repeatedly at the bottom of impossible documents. Daniel closed the file, then spoke the sentence that changed everything. "I think it's time we pay Ms. Keller a visit." Susan Keller turned out to be harder to find than expected. Not because she disappeared, because she suddenly became unavailable. The day after Daniel Brooks suggested contacting her, his office called the number listed on her notary registration. No answer. A voicemail. Professional. Polite. Nothing unusual. Another call followed the next day. Still nothing. An email received no response. A certified letter remained unclaimed. Daniel found that interesting. Otis found it predictable. People usually became difficult to reach when they realized questions were coming, especially questions with legal consequences. By the end of the week, another development demanded attention. Megan finally contacted him directly, not through attorneys, not through paperwork. Personally. The call arrived at 8:47 p.m. Otis sat alone inside the rental townhouse Daniel had helped him secure in Wichita. The television was off. The kitchen table was covered with documents, bank records, school records, custody filings. Evidence had become part of daily life. His phone vibrated. The screen displayed a familiar number. For a moment he simply stared, then answered. "Hello?" Silence greeted him first. Several seconds, just breathing. Then Megan spoke. "You've been busy." The voice sounded familiar, and strangely unfamiliar at the same time. Almost a year had passed. A year filled with distance, secrets, assumptions. Now every word carried different meaning. Otis remained calm. "I've been looking for my children." Another pause. Then Megan laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because she wanted control. "You always make everything sound dramatic." Otis said nothing. Silence often revealed more than arguments. Megan continued. "You should have called before showing up in Wichita. I didn't know I needed permission." The answer arrived evenly, measured. No anger, no sarcasm, just fact. That seemed to irritate her. "You're confusing the kids." Otis looked at the stack of forged documents on his table. The kids were already confused. The silence that followed lasted longer. Long enough to matter. Long enough to suggest he had touched something uncomfortable. When Megan spoke again, her tone sharpened. "You don't understand what they've been through." Otis almost responded. Almost. Instead, he waited. People filled silence when they felt pressure, exactly as Daniel predicted. "You left for nearly a year." There it was. The narrative. Again. Always the same story. You weren't there. You chose deployment. You chose the Army. The accusations arrived in familiar order, repeated often enough to sound rehearsed. Otis finally spoke. "I came home 6 weeks early." Silence. Not surprise, not confusion. A different silence. The silence of someone forced to acknowledge an inconvenient fact. "You never told me." The statement sounded defensive. Otis noticed immediately. Not happy, not relieved, not curious. Defensive. "I wanted to surprise my family." Another pause. Then Megan changed direction. A subtle shift, the kind people made when one argument stopped working. "Look, this doesn't have to become ugly." The sentence sounded reasonable, until examined closely. Otis had spent months reviewing military reports. Language mattered. Words mattered. And people rarely used phrases like that unless ugliness already existed. "I agree," he said. "Good." Relief entered her voice. Momentarily, then she ruined it. "You should stop digging." There it was, the second warning. The anonymous texts. Now this. Different wording. Same message. "Stop looking." Otis leaned back. His eyes moved toward the evidence folders. "Why?" Megan didn't answer immediately. "Because this is affecting the children." "No." The interruption arrived quietly, firmly. "This started affecting the children long before I came home." The line landed. Hard. She knew it. He knew it. Neither mentioned Emma's voicemail. Neither mentioned Luke's questions. Neither needed to. The facts sat between them. Finally, Megan sighed. A long exhale. Then another voice appeared unexpectedly. Male. Faint. In the background. Tyler. Otis recognized it instantly. Not the words. The voice. Tyler Vaughn. Close enough to the phone that he could be heard. Close enough to suggest he was sitting beside her. The realization confirmed something important. This wasn't merely Megan's battle. Tyler was involved. Deeply involved. Megan lowered her voice. "I have to go." Then the line disconnected. No goodbye. No explanation. Nothing. Otis stared at the phone. The conversation lasted less than 6 minutes, yet it revealed plenty. Megan wasn't frightened. Not yet. But she was worried. Otherwise she wouldn't have called. Otherwise she wouldn't have tried steering him away. People confident in the truth rarely discouraged investigations. The next morning, Daniel called, and the situation escalated again. "Check your email." Otis opened his laptop. A document waited inside his inbox. Official court filing. Freshly submitted. Emergency custody motion. Additional supporting affidavit. Signed by Megan Foster. He read slowly. Every page, every claim, every accusation. The pattern remained familiar. Otis Foster allegedly prioritized military service over parenting. Otis Foster allegedly demonstrated emotional instability. Otis Foster allegedly failed to maintain meaningful contact with the children. Otis Foster allegedly created stress and confusion after unexpectedly appearing in Wichita. The document painted a clear picture. A selfish soldier. An absent father. A man returning only when convenient. The version barely resembled reality, yet legal paperwork gave stories power. Daniel appeared less concerned than expected. When they met later that afternoon, he dropped the filing onto the conference table. "She's moving too fast," Otis frowned. "That's bad. Usually," the attorney pointed toward several statements. "When people rush, mistakes happen." Another page. "Claims become exaggerated." Another. "Timelines stop matching." Another. "Details become impossible." Otis looked closer. Daniel highlighted dates, statements, assertions. One date immediately stood out. The filing claimed Megan informed him about the move before relocating. The claim was easy to disprove. Phone records, messages, emails. Nothing supported it. Another statement claimed Otis voluntarily reduced communication with the children during deployment. Again, false. Video call records existed. Military internet logs existed. Screenshots existed. Evidence existed. Daniel smiled slightly. The first real smile Otis had seen from him. She thinks emotion beats documentation. The attorney tapped the paperwork. It doesn't. For the next several hours, they prepared responses, evidence packets, supporting records, witness lists, timeline summaries, everything organized carefully, everything documented, everything ready. The process felt familiar to Otis, not because of law, because of logistics. Information mattered. Organization mattered. Preparation mattered. The same principles applied. As evening approached, Daniel closed one folder and opened another. This folder contained public records regarding Tyler Vaughn, property information, business records, professional licensing, background material. One page immediately caught attention. A recent business dispute. Minor, financial, nothing criminal. Yet interesting. Tyler apparently had significant debt related to a failed investment property. Not catastrophic, noticeable. Daniel tapped the page. Money creates motivation. Otis nodded. The statement made sense. A new apartment, missing savings, relocation expenses, furniture purchases. Financial pressure connected many stories. Maybe too many. Then Daniel revealed something else. His private investigator had finally located Susan Keller. Not physically, digitally, social media activity, banking patterns, public appearances. Enough to establish she hadn't disappeared. She was avoiding contact, deliberately. The attorney closed the folder. That tells me she's nervous, Otis agreed. Innocent witnesses usually answered phone calls. Nervous witnesses didn't. The office grew quiet. Outside, evening traffic moved through downtown Wichita. Inside, the pieces continued connecting. Megan, Tyler, the forged signatures, the missing savings, the notary, the custody filings. A larger picture was emerging, and every new detail seemed to push the same conclusion. Someone had spent months building a legal reality that never actually happened. Daniel gathered the folders, then looked directly at Otis. I hope you're prepared. For what? The attorney's expression hardened slightly. They're not trying to win an argument anymore. He tapped the emergency custody filing. They're trying to win the first hearing. The distinction mattered, because first impressions shaped court cases. And somewhere in Sedgwick County Courthouse, a judge would soon hear two very different stories. One built on emotion, one built on evidence. The question was whether the truth could arrive before the damage became permanent. The first hearing took place on a gray Tuesday morning. Rain covered downtown Wichita. Water streaked across the courthouse windows. The sky looked heavy enough to collapse. Otis Foster arrived 30 minutes early. Military habits. Being late created problems. Being early created options. He parked across the street from the Sedgwick County Courthouse and sat inside his truck for several minutes. Not because he was nervous, because he was thinking. The black folder rested beside him. Months ago, that folder hadn't existed. Now it contained the story of his life. Deployment records, bank statements, school documents, forged signatures, evidence. Enough paper to fill a small filing cabinet. Yet none of it mattered unless the right person listened. Daniel Brooks had explained that repeatedly. Courtrooms weren't television. Truth rarely exploded into the room dramatically. Truth arrived through procedure, through patience, through timing. Otis exited the truck and walked toward the courthouse entrance. The building felt cold. Metal detectors, security officers, echoing hallways. People carrying folders and stress. Family court occupied the third floor. The waiting area was already crowded. Parents, attorneys, children, grandparents, lives being reorganized through legal paperwork. Otis sat quietly near a window, watching, listening, thinking. Then Megan arrived. The reaction surprised him, not because she was there, because she looked prepared. professionally prepared. Dark blue blazer, carefully styled hair, perfect makeup, every detail controlled, every detail intentional. Someone unfamiliar with the situation would have seen a responsible mother, someone trustworthy, someone sympathetic. Tyler Vaughn entered behind her, carrying a leather portfolio, expensive suit, confident posture. The image looked polished, almost rehearsed. Megan noticed Otis immediately. Their eyes met briefly. No smile, no greeting, no acknowledgement, just calculation. Then she turned away. Tyler glanced toward him. A quick look. Nothing more. But Otis recognized the expression. The man looked comfortable. Too comfortable. Like someone expecting a favorable outcome. Daniel arrived moments later, coffee in one hand, briefcase in the other. He sat beside Otis. "How are you feeling?" The question sounded routine. The answer was honest. "Fine." Daniel studied him, then nodded. Because it was true. Otis wasn't fine emotionally. No father in his position would be, but emotionally and strategically weren't the same thing. Strategically, he remained focused. The courtroom opened shortly afterward. Everyone entered. Judge Eleanor Whitaker presided. 61 years old, former family law attorney, known for patience, known for thoroughness, known for disliking courtroom theatrics. That last detail mattered. The hearing began precisely at 9 o'clock. Megan's attorney spoke first. A woman named Vanessa Reed, sharp, experienced, confident. She immediately established the narrative: a devoted mother, a frequently absent father, children struggling with instability, military deployments creating emotional distance. Every statement sounded reasonable when presented alone. That was the danger. Good stories often borrowed pieces of truth. Otis had deployed. That part was true. He had been absent physically. Also true. The problem wasn't the facts. The problem was what happened between them. Vanessa Reed continued. The children require consistency. The children require emotional security. The children require protection from disruptive influences. The phrase caught Otis's attention. Disruptive influences. Interesting wording, because apparently a father returning home qualified. Megan testified next. Daniel had warned him. Do not react. No matter what she says, no matter how unfair it sounds, no matter how inaccurate, just listen. So he did. Megan described years of sacrifice, years of loneliness, years of parenting alone. She spoke carefully, emotionally, convincingly, not enough to appear theatrical, just enough to appear sincere. The courtroom listened. The judge listened. Megan described missed birthdays, missed holidays, missed school events. All technically true. Military service created those absences. Then she expanded further. She suggested Otis preferred deployment, suggested he volunteered repeatedly, suggested he chose military opportunities over family responsibilities. Otis remained motionless. The accusations landed. But he didn't move, didn't object, didn't interrupt. Daniel had instructed him specifically. Let her build the story. The attorney knew something important. The more complete a false narrative became, the easier it was to dismantle later. Then came the most difficult part. Megan discussed the children, Luke's confusion, Emma's emotional struggles, their adjustment to Wichita, their fear that life might change again. For the first time all morning, Otis looked down. Not because he couldn't handle the testimony, because hearing his children used as supporting evidence hurt. The kids were real. Their pain was real, even if the explanation behind it wasn't. When Megan finished, the courtroom felt sympathetic. Daniel noticed it too. That didn't concern him. Sympathy wasn't evidence. Still, first impressions mattered. Then came Otis's turn. He walked to the witness stand, took the oath, sat down. The courtroom suddenly felt quieter. Vanessa Reed approached first. The attorney smiled politely. Professional, controlled. Sergeant Foster? Yes. You have spent significant time overseas during your children's lives? Yes. No argument, no explanation, just truth. You missed birthdays? Some. Holidays? Yes. School events? Yes. Again, truth. The attorney continued building momentum, because that's what skilled attorneys did. They stacked facts together until they suggested a conclusion. Then they hoped nobody examined the gaps. Finally, she asked the question she wanted. Would you agree that your military career has often come before your family? Silence settled briefly. The courtroom waited. Otis answered carefully. My military career supported my family. Not defensive, not emotional, simply accurate. Vanessa shifted direction. You unexpectedly appeared in Wichita without notifying anyone. Yes. Do you believe that was appropriate? Yes. The answer surprised her. She paused. Why? Otis looked directly at her. Because nobody informed me my children had been moved. A subtle shift occurred inside the courtroom. Small, but noticeable. The first crack. The first reminder that another version existed. Vanessa quickly moved on. No follow-up. No deeper exploration. Daniel noticed that too. Then his turn arrived. The attorney stood slowly, walked toward the witness stand, and asked only a handful of questions, far fewer than expected. Sergeant Foster? Yes. When did you return from Kuwait? Otis provided the date. Daniel entered deployment documentation, simple, clean, official, no drama, no lengthy speeches, just evidence. When did your children transfer schools? Another date, another document, another quiet submission. The timeline sat there, visible, unavoidable. Judge Whitaker studied the paperwork carefully. The courtroom grew quieter. Daniel continued. Were you informed beforehand? No. Did you sign the school transfer documents? Or no? That was it. No dramatic reveal. No cross-examination ambush. No explosive evidence. Just foundations. The beginning, not the conclusion. Daniel intentionally held back. Most of the evidence remained inside his briefcase, untouched, unpresented, unrevealed. The hearing concluded shortly afterward. Judge Whitaker reviewed temporary matters, visitation schedules, custody arrangements, procedural requirements. Then she delivered her ruling. Temporary supervised visitation for Otis, further review scheduled, additional evidence permitted, not a victory, not a defeat, something in between. Still, the decision hurt, because supervised visitation implied uncertainty, implied concern, implied questions. Otis accepted it without reaction. The judge adjourned the hearing. People stood, papers gathered, conversations resumed. Outside the courtroom, Megan appeared relieved. Tyler appeared even more relieved. They whispered together near the elevators. The confidence had returned. Daniel watched them, then smiled. A small smile, the kind that meant something. Otis noticed immediately. Why are you smiling? Daniel waited until Megan disappeared down the hallway, then answered, Because they think they won. Otis frowned. Didn't they? No. The attorney adjusted his tie. They won a temporary order. That's different. Daniel tapped the briefcase containing the remaining evidence. Bank records, forgeries, financial transfers, witness information, notary documents. Everything still hidden. Everything still waiting. They just spent an hour committing themselves to a story. The attorney's expression hardened. And stories become dangerous when facts start arriving. Otis looked back toward the elevator. The doors had already closed. Megan and Tyler were gone. Confident, relieved, certain. Daniel picked up his briefcase. "Let them celebrate." The attorney's voice remained calm. "Because the next hearing won't be about emotions." He glanced down at the evidence. "It'll be about proof." And proof was something neither Megan nor Tyler seemed worried about. At least not yet. The first hearing changed something. Not legally, psychologically. Before the hearing, Megan and Tyler acted cautiously. Afterward, they acted confident. And confidence made people careless. Daniel Brooks understood that immediately. 3 days after the courthouse appearance, he spread several folders across the conference table in his office and looked at Otis Foster. "They think the judge saw them as the reasonable side." Otis nodded. "Maybe she did." For now, Daniel smiled faintly. "That's the important part." The attorney tapped one of the folders. "When people think they're winning, they stop protecting themselves." The next several weeks became a process of collecting pieces, small pieces, boring pieces, the kind most people ignored. But legal cases rarely turned on dramatic moments, they turned on details, and details were beginning to pile up. The first breakthrough came from Manhattan. Mrs. Patterson, the retired teacher who had lived next door to the Foster family for years. She contacted Daniel's office after hearing about the custody dispute. The woman wasn't interested in gossip, she was interested in accuracy. When Daniel interviewed her, she provided something nobody expected. Video footage, her doorbell camera. The camera pointed partially toward the street, normally useless, except during the week Megan moved. The footage showed a rental truck parked outside the Foster home. Workers loading furniture. Boxes. Household items. The video itself wasn't shocking. The timestamps were. Daniel watched carefully. The footage began almost 3 weeks before Otis returned from Kuwait. Several clips showed Megan supervising the move, organizing, directing, planning. Nothing suggested a sudden decision. Nothing suggested an emergency. Nothing suggested confusion. The move looked deliberate. Prepared, structured, exactly the opposite of how Megan described it in court. The attorney copied every file, added them to the growing evidence collection. Then another piece arrived, unexpectedly. A teacher from Riley Creek Elementary reached out. Her name was Sarah Whitmore, 4th grade teacher. She taught Emma during the previous school year. Sarah remembered Emma clearly, not because Emma caused problems, because she asked questions, lots of questions. Curious children stood out. The teacher requested a private conversation, nothing official, just information. Daniel arranged the meeting. Otis attended. The teacher appeared nervous at first, not because she feared involvement, because she worried about the children. Eventually, she opened a folder. Inside sat a collection of classroom assignments, drawings, writing exercises, simple school projects. One page immediately caught Otis's attention. The assignment asked students to describe someone important. Emma chose her father. The drawing showed a soldier, a little girl, a fishing pole, a lake. The date sat at the top. 7 months earlier, before the move, before the lies fully developed, before everything changed. Otis stared at the page for several seconds. Then Sarah handed him another document, a journal exercise. More recent. Only weeks before Emma transferred schools. The handwriting looked smaller, less confident. The message was short. "My dad loves the Army more than me." The room became silent. Not because the statement surprised anyone, because seeing it written by an 8-year-old felt different, more personal, more real. Sarah folded her hands. Emma didn't believe that before. Otis looked up. What changed? The teacher hesitated, then answered carefully, "I don't know." But she started saying it often. Daniel immediately requested copies, not because the writings proved anything legally, because they demonstrated influence, a timeline, a shift in perception, evidence that the narrative had reached the children long before the move. Another folder joined the stack, then another, then another. The case continued growing. Meanwhile, Captain Rachel Monroe remained busy. Military documentation turned out to be even more valuable than expected. Rachel provided deployment verification records, travel logs, duty assignments, communication records, location reports. The Army documented nearly everything. Dates, times, locations. Each document strengthened the same conclusion. Otis could not have signed paperwork in Kansas because he wasn't there. Simple, clear, difficult to argue against. One afternoon, Rachel called personally. "Come by my office." Otis arrived later that day. Rachel had several documents already waiting. She slid them across the desk. "What am I looking at? Communication logs." Otis reviewed them. Video calls, internet sessions, approved contact periods, every interaction with his children during deployment. Detailed, precise. Rachel pointed toward a highlighted section. "Megan's filing claims you reduced communication." Otis nodded. "Yes?" "The records disagree." The highlighted pages showed regular contact, consistent contact, weekly video calls, messages, scheduled family communication sessions. The pattern remained stable until shortly before Megan moved. Then something changed. Several scheduled calls had been canceled, not by Otis, by the receiving side. Interesting. Rachel noticed his expression. "You see it?" "Yeah." The timeline was becoming clearer. As Megan prepared to relocate, communication between father and children decreased. Not because he stopped calling, because calls stopped being answered. The distinction mattered. A lot. Rachel leaned back. People forget records exist. The observation felt increasingly true. Every accusation seemed to collapse once documentation appeared. The challenge wasn't proving reality. The challenge was collecting enough pieces, and those pieces kept coming. One of the most significant arrived through financial records. Daniel's investigators spent days tracing money. Not criminally, legally, following transactions, transfers, deposits, patterns. Eventually, the trail led somewhere unexpected. Tyler Vaughn. Specifically, Tyler's apartment expenses. Bank records revealed that several withdrawals from the foster family accounts occurred shortly before deposits connected to apartment setup costs. Furniture. Security deposits. Utility activation fees. Moving expenses. Nothing directly illegal, but suspicious. Very suspicious, especially given the timing. Daniel organized the information carefully. The attorney refused to jump to conclusions, but patterns mattered, and this pattern looked increasingly difficult to explain. The evidence room inside Daniel's office, really just a storage room filled with filing cabinets, began resembling an investigation board. Timelines covered one wall. Dates connected to events. Documents connected to witnesses. Witnesses connected to filings. Everything connected somehow. The larger picture slowly emerged. One evening, Daniel stood staring at the timeline, Otis beside him. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Daniel pointed. "Look." The attorney traced a path through the timeline. School transfer preparations, bank withdrawals, apartment arrangements, reduced communication, custody filings. Each event overlapped. Each event supported another. None appeared random. The conclusion felt obvious. Someone had spent months preparing a relocation, months preparing a legal narrative, months preparing children to believe a particular version of events. The room remained quiet. Then Daniel received a phone call. The attorney listened, spoke briefly, ended the call. His expression changed immediately. Not excitement, interest. Focused interest. "What happened?" Otis asked. Daniel placed the phone down. "Our friend, Susan Keller." The name instantly caught attention. The notary, the missing piece, the woman whose signature appeared beneath multiple questionable documents. "What about her?" Daniel leaned against the table. She finally responded. Otis waited. The attorney smiled slightly. "Not to us." That answer seemed strange. Then, to who? Another attorney. Daniel opened a notebook. Apparently, Susan recently contacted legal counsel regarding concerns about documentation she notarized months earlier. The development mattered, because innocent people rarely hired attorneys over paperwork. Concerned people did. Worried people did. People who sensed problems did. Daniel closed the notebook, then looked directly at Otis. "I think she's getting nervous." The statement hung in the air because nervous people made mistakes, and mistakes created opportunities. The attorney walked toward the evidence board again, studied the timeline, then pointed toward Susan Keller's name. "If she talks—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Both men understood. If the notary cooperated, the entire structure supporting Megan's story might begin collapsing. And judging by recent events, that collapse could happen much sooner than anyone expected. Susan Keller agreed to meet on a Thursday afternoon. Not at her office, not at Daniel Brooks's office, not at the courthouse. She chose a small coffee shop on the west side of Wichita. The location itself told Daniel something. People comfortable with their decisions usually preferred formal settings. People nervous preferred neutral ground. Susan arrived 10 minutes late. She looked exactly like someone who hadn't slept well. 57 years old. Professional appearance. Neatly dressed, yet exhausted. Her eyes moved constantly. Door, window, parking lot, back to the door, then back to the table. Daniel noticed everything. Otis noticed even more. Years of military service taught observation. Susan looked like a witness carrying weight. Not someone hiding a crime. Someone carrying regret. The distinction mattered. Daniel stood and introduced himself. Susan shook hands, then glanced at Otis. Recognition appeared immediately, not because she knew him personally, because she knew who he was. The man whose name appeared on documents she had notarized. The man she had never actually met. An uncomfortable silence followed. Finally, Susan spoke. "I wasn't expecting this." Daniel remained calm. "We appreciate you coming." Susan nodded, but her hands remained tight around a coffee cup, tight enough that her knuckles turned pale. Nobody rushed her. Sometimes silence encouraged honesty better than questions. Eventually, she looked directly at Otis. "You were really overseas." The statement wasn't a question. Otis answered anyway. "Yes." Susan lowered her eyes. For several seconds she stared into her coffee. Then she exhaled slowly. The kind of exhale people make when they realize denial is no longer possible. Daniel opened a folder. Inside sat copies of several notarized documents. Carefully organized. Professionally prepared. He slid them across the table. Susan didn't need to read them. She recognized them immediately. The reaction appeared in her face. Subtle, brief, unmistakable. "You've seen these before." Another statement, not a question. Susan nodded. "Yes." Daniel leaned slightly forward. "Did you witness Otis Foster sign these documents?" The answer arrived quickly. No. No hesitation. No qualification. Just no. The coffee shop suddenly felt quieter. Outside, traffic moved normally. Inside, something important had just changed. because until now suspicion existed. Now there was testimony. Susan folded her hands together. I thought the paperwork had already been signed. Daniel said nothing, encouraging her to continue. And she did. Months earlier, Tyler Vaughn contacted her office. He said he needed several family-related documents notarized. Nothing unusual. Notaries handled paperwork every day. Tyler explained that one party was unavailable due to military service. The signatures had supposedly been completed beforehand. He only needed final verification and processing. Susan admitted she should have refused, should have required direct confirmation, should have followed procedure more carefully. But she didn't. Because Tyler appeared confident, prepared, knowledgeable. The documents looked legitimate. Everything seemed organized, professional, normal, at least initially. Daniel listened carefully, then asked the important question. Did Megan Foster attend? Susan nodded. Yes. The answer mattered, because it connected both names directly. Tyler, Megan, together, present during the notarization process. Daniel continued. Were they together? Yes. Another important answer. Susan rubbed her forehead. The memory clearly troubled her. I didn't think anything was wrong at first. Then what changed? The notary hesitated, long enough to reveal discomfort. Finally she answered. The money. Daniel exchanged a glance with Otis. Not surprise. Interest. Explain. Susan looked embarrassed. Genuinely embarrassed. After the paperwork was finished, Tyler handed me an envelope. Silence. The explanation continued. He called it a thank you. The words sounded weak even to her, because everyone understood what they meant. Not necessarily a bribe, not necessarily illegal, but inappropriate. Very inappropriate. Susan admitted she refused initially. Tyler insisted, claimed she had helped a military family, claimed they appreciated the assistance, claimed it was harmless. Eventually she accepted. A mistake, one she clearly regretted. Daniel made careful notes, then asked another question. The envelope contained cash. Susan nodded. Yes, that answer mattered. A lot. Not because cash proved fraud, because it suggested consciousness. People rarely paid extra for routine paperwork, not unless they wanted cooperation, or silence, or both. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. Piece by piece, Susan described the events, dates, meetings, documents, interactions. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive. Yet every detail reinforced the same conclusion. The paperwork process had not occurred normally, not even close. Then Daniel asked the question that changed everything. Do you still have records? Susan looked up. What kind? Any records? The notary considered that, then nodded slowly. Maybe. Daniel waited. Susan explained that her office maintained security cameras. Not permanently, but archives existed. Some recordings remained stored on backup drives, especially recordings connected to business disputes. Daniel sat forward. You're serious? I think so. The possibility hung in the air. Video. Actual video. Not opinions. Not recollections. Not interpretations. Video. Evidence far stronger than testimony. Susan continued thinking, then remembered something else. Email correspondence, scheduling messages, appointment confirmations, communications with Tyler, possibly Megan, everything stored electronically, potentially recoverable. The attorney's notebook quickly filled with information. The meeting ended shortly afterward, but not before Susan made one final statement. A statement none of them expected. She looked directly at Otis. I don't think they expected you to come back early. The observation felt obvious now, yet hearing it from an outsider created new perspective. Because she was right. The entire plan appeared built around time, distance, deployment, absence, the assumption that Otis remained overseas, the assumption that nobody would verify details, the assumption that documents would never face scrutiny. His early return changed everything. Susan eventually left, walking slowly toward her car, looking noticeably lighter than when she arrived, like someone finally setting down a burden. Daniel watched her leave, then closed his notebook. Well, Otis looked over. The attorney rarely displayed excitement. Today he looked close. That's significant. Otis nodded. Yeah. Actually, Daniel corrected, it's more than significant. He gathered the folders, organized the notes, prepared the next steps. Then he looked directly at Otis. For the first time, we have someone from their side. The phrase mattered, because Susan wasn't connected to Otis, wasn't military, wasn't family, wasn't biased in his favor. She was neutral, a third party, exactly the type courts trusted. The following week moved quickly. Daniel's office obtained records, email archives, scheduling logs, security footage. The process took time. But eventually, the files arrived, and when they did, the evidence proved even stronger than expected. The security footage showed Tyler entering Susan's office, Megan beside him, documents in hand. No Otis, no military husband, no second signer, just the two of them. Exactly as Susan described. Then came another clip, one Daniel replayed 3 separate times. Tyler handing Susan an envelope, small, brown, thick. The video lacked audio. It didn't need any. The image spoke clearly enough. Daniel sat back slowly. For the first time since taking the case, he looked genuinely impressed, not by the deception, by how completely it was beginning to unravel. He copied the footage, backed it up, stored it securely, then prepared a new evidence package, a much larger one, a much stronger one. And as the stack grew higher, one thing became increasingly obvious. The second hearing was going to look very different from the first, because this time they wouldn't be arguing about feelings. They wouldn't be arguing about perceptions. They wouldn't even be arguing about parenting. They would be arguing about facts. And facts were becoming dangerous for everyone who helped build the lie. The second hearing began before sunrise for Otis Foster. Not because court started early, because sleep never arrived. He sat at the kitchen table of the townhouse in Wichita drinking coffee that had long gone cold. Folders covered the surface. Evidence. Months of evidence. The stack looked almost absurd now. School records, bank records, deployment logs, video footage, emails, witness statements, notary documentation. The collection had become too large to dismiss as coincidence, too detailed to explain away. Yet Otis understood something important. Evidence sitting in folders changed nothing. Evidence presented effectively changed everything. At 7:30, Daniel Brooks arrived. The attorney carried 2 large trial binders, professional, organized, prepared. He placed them on the table. Ready? Otis looked at the binders, then nodded. Yeah. Daniel studied him for a moment. You're calmer than most people. Otis almost smiled. Military life taught patience, long waits, long deployments, long investigations. Emotion rarely improved outcomes. Daniel seemed satisfied with the answer. Together they headed toward the courthouse. The sky above Wichita remained overcast. Rain threatened again. The city looked gray, muted, appropriate. By 8:30, the courthouse hallways were already busy. Family court always seemed crowded. People waiting for life-changing decisions, people hoping, people worrying, people pretending not to worry. Today felt different, at least for Daniel. The attorney moved with unusual confidence, not arrogance. Preparation, the kind that came from knowing exactly what sat inside his briefcase. Megan arrived 15 minutes later. Tyler followed, just as before. But something had changed. Subtle, yet noticeable. Tyler no longer looked relaxed. His smile appeared forced. His eyes moved constantly, checking doors, checking hallways, checking faces. The behavior reminded Otis of people during military inspections. People worried someone might discover something. Megan looked more composed, but even she seemed slightly tense. Not enough for strangers to notice, enough for Otis, enough for Daniel. The courtroom opened. Everyone entered. Judge Eleanor Whitaker took the bench. The proceedings began, and immediately the difference between this hearing and the previous one became obvious. The first hearing focused on stories. This one focused on facts. Vanessa Reed Megan's attorney began exactly as expected. The same narrative returned. A devoted mother, a frequently absent father, children needing stability, military obligations interfering with parenting. The familiar themes filled the room. The judge listened, took notes, occasionally asked questions. Nothing unusual. Then Megan testified. Again, this time with greater confidence. The first hearing had gone well for her. That confidence showed. She repeated many earlier claims. Otis prioritized the Army. Otis failed to communicate. Otis created uncertainty. Otis appeared suddenly in Wichita. The story remained consistent. Mostly. Daniel noticed every small variation, every adjustment, every contradiction, because he had spent weeks preparing. Eventually, Megan finished. The courtroom became quiet. Judge Whitaker looked toward Daniel. "Mr. Brooks?" The attorney stood, calmly, without rushing, without theatrics, exactly as planned. "Your Honor, we'd like to address several factual issues." The phrase sounded harmless, almost boring. That was intentional. Daniel approached the witness stand carrying only one folder. Not all the evidence. Just enough. He began with military records. Simple. Clear. Official. Deployment documentation established Otis's location. Dates. Times. Assignments. Travel logs. Every record aligned. Every record confirmed the same thing. Otis was in Kuwait, not Kansas. Judge Whitaker reviewed the documents carefully. Vanessa Reed objected once. The objection failed. The records remained. Then Daniel moved to the school transfer paperwork. Again methodical. Again calm. He displayed signatures, compared them, placed them beside authenticated military signatures. The differences appeared obvious once highlighted. The judge leaned forward, interested now. The courtroom felt different. Attention shifted. The story was beginning to crack. Then Daniel introduced financial records, withdrawals, transfers, educational savings accounts, money moving from children's funds into accounts controlled by Megan. The atmosphere changed again. Not dramatically. Gradually, like pressure building inside a sealed room. Vanessa Reed's confidence started fading. Questions became more frequent. Objections became more frequent. Neither helped. The records remained. The dates remained. The transactions remained. Facts rarely cared about objections. Then Daniel called Susan Keller. The room became still. Even Megan looked surprised. Not shocked, but uncomfortable. The distinction mattered. Susan approached the witness stand, took the oath, sat down. For a moment, she appeared nervous. Then she saw the evidence binders, saw the documentation, saw the reality of the situation. And something changed. People often relaxed once they stopped protecting lies. Daniel began gently. State your name. Occupation. Professional background. Basic questions. Foundation. Then he reached the important part. Did you notarize documents related to Megan Foster and Otis Foster? Yes. The answer echoed softly through the courtroom. Daniel continued. Were you present when Otis Foster signed those documents? Silence. Not long, just long enough. Then Susan answered. No. The word landed heavily. Judge Whitaker stopped writing. Vanessa Reed stopped writing too. Everyone listened. Daniel didn't rush. Did you ever personally witness Otis Foster sign any of those documents? No. Again. Clear, direct, unambiguous. Daniel introduced the security footage next. The courtroom monitor flickered on. Video appeared. The footage showed Susan's office, Tyler entering, Megan beside him, documents in hand. No Otis. No military husband. No second signer. Exactly as Susan described. The courtroom watched silently. Then came the second clip, the envelope. Tyler handing Susan a thick brown envelope. The image remained visible for several seconds. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Judge Whitaker's expression hardened. Not dramatically, professionally, but noticeably. Then Daniel introduced email records, scheduling communications, appointment arrangements, messages connecting Tyler directly to the notarization process. One document after another, one layer after another. The narrative continued collapsing, slowly, methodically, relentlessly. Vanessa Reed attempted recovery. Cross-examination began. She challenged Susan's memory, questioned timelines, suggested misunderstandings. Susan remained steady. The witness wasn't hostile, wasn't defensive. That made her credible, very credible. Then Daniel introduced the final piece, a timeline board. Simple, visual, powerful, school transfers, apartment lease, bank withdrawals, custody filings, communication disruptions, every event aligned. Every date supported another. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Months of preparation, months of coordination, months of building a false narrative. The judge studied the timeline for a long moment, long enough that nobody moved. Then, something unexpected happened. Tyler Vaughn stood. Not formally, not strategically, emotionally. A mistake. A major mistake. He whispered something toward Vanessa Reed, too aggressively, too urgently. The attorney tried calming him. It didn't work. Tyler looked toward the evidence screen, toward the video footage, toward Susan Keller, then toward Megan. Panic had finally arrived. Real panic. The kind confidence couldn't hide. Judge Whitaker noticed immediately. Everyone noticed. Without another word, Tyler grabbed his jacket, turned, and walked out of the courtroom. The door closed behind him. Hard. The sound echoed through the room. Nobody followed. Nobody stopped him. Because the damage was already done. Judge Whitaker looked toward the empty doorway, then toward Megan, then toward the evidence binders. The silence that followed felt heavier than any testimony. Daniel slowly returned to counsel table, not smiling, not celebrating, simply waiting. Because he knew what everyone in the room now understood. The case no longer revolved around a father choosing the army. It revolved around something else entirely, something far more serious. And for the first time since Otis came home early from Kuwait, the truth wasn't struggling to catch up. The truth had finally entered the room. When the courtroom reconvened after a short recess, the atmosphere had changed completely. The first hearing had felt like a custody dispute. The second hearing now felt like an investigation. Tyler Vaughn's empty chair remained visible in the gallery. No one occupied it. No one moved it. It sat there as a quiet reminder of what had happened. People confident in their position usually stayed. People who left in the middle of testimony rarely improved their credibility. Judge Eleanor Whitaker returned to the bench carrying several pages of notes. The courtroom stood, then sat. Silence settled across the room. For the first time since the case began, Megan looked genuinely uncertain. Not defeated, not yet, but uncertain. The confidence she carried through earlier hearings had weakened. The evidence had done that. Not arguments, not accusations. Evidence. Otis sat beside Daniel Brooks without speaking. He had learned long ago that important moments rarely felt dramatic while they were happening. They felt quiet, measured, almost ordinary. The judge began reviewing the record. Methodically, professionally, every statement carried weight, every observation mattered. The court has reviewed the deployment records. She turned a page. The court has reviewed the educational transfer documents. Another page. The court has reviewed financial documentation. Another. The court has reviewed testimony provided by Susan Keller. No emotion entered her voice. Just facts, the way judges preferred. Judge Whitaker paused briefly, then continued. The evidence presented raises substantial concerns regarding the accuracy of prior representations made to schools, institutions, and this court. The sentence landed heavily, not because it sounded dramatic, because legal language rarely became that direct. Vanessa Reed attempted a response. The attorney argued misunderstandings, confusion, administrative mistakes, communication problems, reasonable explanations. The judge listened, then asked a simple question. If Mr. Foster was physically present in Kuwait, how did he personally execute the documents? Silence followed. A long silence. Not because nobody heard the question, because nobody possessed a convincing answer. Vanessa Reed eventually responded. Carefully, cautiously. The explanation sounded weak even before it ended. Judge Whitaker returned to her notes. That answer seemed sufficient. Not sufficient legally, sufficient for understanding. The truth was becoming visible. And visible truth created consequences. The next 30 minutes focused on custody, specifically the children. Always the children. Because despite the fraud concerns, despite the financial issues, despite the deception, the court's primary responsibility remained Luke and Emma. Judge Whitaker reviewed communication records, video call logs, school records, teacher observations. The evidence revealed a pattern. Otis had maintained contact during deployment, regularly, consistently. The disruptions occurred later, after preparations for relocation began. That distinction mattered. A lot. Eventually, the judge looked directly toward Megan. The courtroom grew noticeably quieter. Mrs. Foster? Megan straightened slightly. Yes, Your Honor. Did you inform your children that their father voluntarily chose military service over them? The question arrived calmly, without accusation, without hostility. Yet everyone understood its significance. Megan hesitated. A mistake. Even a brief hesitation sometimes revealed more than an answer. Then she responded. I told them the truth as I understood it. Judge Whitaker held her gaze for several seconds, then returned to her notes. No reaction, no comment. Yet the answer clearly failed to help. Daniel remained silent. The attorney knew when to speak. He also knew when silence worked better. This was one of those moments. The hearing continued. Witness statements, educational records, custody recommendations, everything moving steadily toward conclusion. Then Judge Whitaker delivered her temporary ruling. The room became still. Every person present understood its importance. The judge adjusted her glasses, looked down briefly, then began. Based upon the evidence presented, the court finds significant concerns regarding the reliability of prior documentation and representations. The statement alone represented a major shift, but she wasn't finished. The court further finds no evidence supporting allegations that Mr. Foster abandoned his children. Otis remained motionless. Inside, something loosened. Not victory. Relief. A difference existed. For months, accusations carried weight. Now, those accusations were being examined and rejected. Judge Whitaker continued. The court therefore modifies the existing temporary custody arrangement. Megan's attorney lowered her eyes. She already knew. Everyone knew. The direction had become obvious. Primary temporary custody is awarded to Mr. Otis Foster, pending final resolution. Silence followed. Heavy silence. Then another statement. Mrs. Foster shall receive scheduled visitation subject to court review. The ruling wasn't final, but it changed everything. Everything. The children would not remain where they were. The assumptions built over months were collapsing, and the legal system had begun correcting course. The hearing concluded shortly afterward. People stood, collected papers, spoke quietly. Life moved again. But not the same way. Outside the courtroom, reporters weren't waiting. No cameras existed. No dramatic crowd gathered. Family court rarely attracted attention. Lives changed there every day, quietly, privately. Still, for Otis, the moment felt significant. Daniel shook his hand once they reached the hallway. "Congratulations!" Otis looked toward the courtroom doors. "It isn't over." "No." Daniel nodded. "It isn't." The attorney's expression remained serious, because additional issues remained unresolved. Financial matters, fraud concerns, potential referrals. More proceedings would follow. But today's outcome mattered. Today changed the direction of the story. Several people exited the courtroom behind them. Attorneys, court staff, witnesses. Eventually, Megan appeared, too. Alone. Tyler still absent. The hallway stretched long and quiet. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Megan approached. Not quickly, not dramatically, slowly. The way people approached conversations they weren't sure how to begin. Daniel immediately noticed. He glanced at Otis, waiting. Otis nodded slightly. The attorney stepped back, far enough to provide privacy, close enough to observe. Megan stopped several feet away. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt different now. Not hostile, not comfortable either. Just tired. Months of lies required energy. Truth required less. Eventually Megan looked down, then back up. "I didn't think you'd fight this hard." The statement surprised him, not because of the words, because of what they revealed. She genuinely believed he wouldn't. Perhaps Tyler believed that too. Perhaps everyone did. The quiet soldier, the absent father, the man deployed overseas. Easy to dismiss. Easy to underestimate. Otis answered honestly. It wasn't about winning. Megan looked away, toward a nearby window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Then she asked something unexpected. "Do the kids hate me?" The question lingered. Heavy. Complicated. Otis considered it carefully, because the answer mattered, and because Luke and Emma deserved honesty. "No," Megan blinked, surprised. He continued. "They love you." The words appeared to affect her more than anything else all day. Perhaps because they were true, perhaps because nobody else had said them. Silence returned. Then Megan spoke again, almost whispering. "I never wanted this to go this far." Otis thought about the forged signatures, the school transfers, the savings accounts, the court filings, the lies told to children. He could have argued, could have challenged her, could have listed every decision. Instead, he simply said, "You made them carry it." Megan stared, confused. What? The lie. His voice remained calm. No anger, no triumph, no revenge, just truth. You made Luke and Emma carry it. For the first time, she had no response. None, because some facts resisted argument. The hallway became quiet again. Finally, Megan nodded once, small, barely visible. Then she turned and walked away. Otis watched her leave, not with satisfaction, not with bitterness, only observation. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, yet it said everything necessary. A few minutes later, another voice called his name. "Dad." He turned immediately. Emma. She stood near the end of the hallway beside a court-appointed family coordinator. Small backpack, long hair, bright eyes, and for the first time since he returned from Kuwait, no confusion remained in her expression. Only certainty. She ran straight toward him. The hug arrived without hesitation, without fear, without doubt. Otis knelt and wrapped his arms around her. Tight, careful, real. Behind her stood Luke, older, more reserved, but smiling. A little. Just enough. And in that moment, surrounded by courthouse walls and legal paperwork and months of conflict, something finally felt settled. Not the case, not the future, just one important truth. His children no longer wondered whether he wanted them. The townhouse wasn't much to look at. 2 bedrooms, 1 small garage, a narrow backyard bordered by a wooden fence. The kitchen cabinets were older than Otis Foster preferred. The carpet needed replacing. The water heater made strange noises at night. But when Luke and Emma walked through the front door carrying their backpacks, the place felt more valuable than any house he had ever lived in, because it contained something the last few months had lacked. A future. The court's temporary custody order had changed daily life almost overnight. Not perfectly, not magically. Children didn't recover from manipulation in a weekend. Trust didn't rebuild itself because a judge signed paperwork. Still, the direction had changed, and direction mattered. The first evening felt awkward, not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. 3 people who loved each other trying to remember how to live together again. Emma adapted quickly. Children her age often did. She immediately claimed the bedroom with the larger window, placed stuffed animals across the bed, arranged books on shelves, hung drawings on walls. Within hours, she had transformed the room into hers. Luke took longer. The 11-year-old moved carefully through the house, examining everything, observing, evaluating. Much like his father. Otis noticed that immediately. The boy unpacked quietly, asked practical questions, where school supplies would go, which bathroom belonged to whom, whether there was internet, questions about logistics, questions that avoided emotions. Otis didn't push. Rachel Monroe once told him something important. People moved toward trust. They couldn't be dragged there. So, he waited. The first week focused on routine. Routine created stability. Stability created confidence. Confidence created trust. Every morning began at 6:15. Breakfast together, school preparation, lunches packed, backpacks checked. Simple things. Normal things. The sort of things Otis spent nearly a year missing. Emma loved helping in the kitchen even when she wasn't helping. Especially when she wasn't helping. One morning, she insisted on making pancakes. The results looked terrible, uneven, burned, misshapen. but she smiled proudly while placing them on plates. Otis ate every bite. Luke noticed. The next morning he quietly took over cooking eggs. No announcement, no explanation, just action. The boys' version of participation. Little by little the house began developing rhythms, small habits, shared expectations, life. The school transition proved harder. Children carried invisible baggage. Luke, especially. His grades remained solid. His behavior remained polite. Yet teachers noticed something. Distance. Caution. A tendency to expect disappointment before it happened. The school counselor explained it gently. He's waiting. For what? The counselor folded her hands. For people to leave. The explanation stayed with Otis, because it made sense. Children learned from experience, and Luke's recent experience taught him that adults change stories. Adults disappeared. Adults moved people around without warning. Trust became expensive under those conditions. Otis responded the only way he knew. Consistency. Every day. No speeches, no promises. Actions. When school ended, he was there. When homework needed help, he helped. When baseball practice happened, he attended. No dramatic gestures. Just presence. Week after week. Slowly, the walls began lowering. Emma's questions came first. Children often tested reality through repetition. Dad, yeah, you aren't leaving again tomorrow. No. The next day, you aren't leaving next week. No. Another day, what about next month? No. Eventually, the questions became less frequent. Not because she forgot, because the answers stayed the same. Luke's process looked different. The boy asked fewer questions. Instead, he observed. Testing reliability through evidence. One evening, Otis arrived 20 minutes late after a meeting with Daniel Brooks. Nothing serious. Just traffic. When he entered the house, Luke looked up from the couch. You said 6. I know. Thought maybe something happened. The statement sounded casual. It wasn't. The concern beneath it remained obvious. Otis sat down beside him. Nothing happened. Luke nodded, then returned to his homework. A small moment, yet meaningful. The boy had started expecting him. Expectations only formed where trust existed. Meanwhile, visitation with Megan continued, court-ordered, structured, supervised initially, then gradually expanded. The children returned from those visits carrying mixed emotions, confusion, love, frustration, hope. None of it surprised Otis. Megan remained their mother. Nothing changed that. Nothing should. The situation remained complicated. Otis never criticized her in front of them, never encouraged resentment, never asked what happened during visits, not because he lacked curiosity, because children deserved freedom from loyalty tests. One night, Emma climbed onto the couch beside him, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Dad? Yeah. Mom says she loves us. Otis looked away from the television. She does. Emma seemed relieved, as if she'd been waiting for permission to believe it. The conversation ended there. It didn't need more. Across the room, Luke listened quietly, absorbing everything, as usual. The months passed, not quickly, not slowly, just steadily. The fraud investigation continued. Court proceedings continued. Daniel occasionally provided updates. Tyler Vaughn had become increasingly difficult to locate. Several business interests disappeared. Property records changed. People often became mobile when legal attention increased. Otis noted the information, then returned to helping with homework, because priorities had changed. Winning the case mattered. Raising the children mattered more. One Saturday afternoon, Luke wheeled an old bicycle into the garage. Chain damaged. Brakes failing. tires low. Most 11-year-olds would have asked for a replacement. Luke asked for tools. Otis smiled. They spent nearly 3 hours repairing it together, not because the bike required 3 hours, because conversations happened during work, side by side, without pressure, without eye contact, without expectations. The best conversations often did. Somewhere between adjusting brakes and tightening bolts, Luke finally asked the question. The real question. The one sitting quietly beneath everything else. Were you mad? Otis knew exactly what he meant. About what? Everything. The garage became quiet. Only the sound of distant traffic remained. Otis considered the answer, then gave the truth. Yeah, Luke nodded, as if he'd expected that. Still are, a little. The honesty seemed important. Children recognized false perfection immediately. Luke stared at the bicycle chain, then asked another question. Why didn't you yell at Mom? Otis thought about courtrooms. Evidence. Documents. Months of lies. Then thought about Luke, a boy trying to understand adulthood. I didn't think yelling would help. Luke considered that. The answer apparently satisfied him, because he returned to tightening a bolt. The conversation moved on. Simple, natural, progress. The biggest sign arrived unexpectedly. Late one Friday evening. Otis returned from taking out the trash. The house sat quiet. Emma already asleep. Television off. Kitchen lights dim. A folded piece of paper rested on the table. His name appeared on the front. Dad. Nothing else. Otis opened it. Inside sat a short, handwritten note. 3 words. Can we go fishing? Then below it Saturday, Otis stared at the paper for several seconds. The handwriting belonged to Luke. The request looked ordinary. Most people would see nothing special. Otis saw something different. Fishing wasn't about fish. Not really. It never had been. Fishing was history, memory, childhood, their thing, the thing they did together before deployment, before Wichita, before lies, before courtrooms. A bridge back toward normal life. Otis folded the note carefully, placed it inside a drawer, then looked toward Luke's bedroom. The door remained closed. The house remained quiet. Yet for the first time since coming home from Kuwait, something felt undeniably real. Not victory, not justice, something better. His son was beginning to trust him again. The final custody hearing lasted less than 40 minutes. After everything that had happened that felt almost strange, months of investigation, months of court filings, months of evidence. Yet the ending arrived quietly, the way many important endings do. By the time the hearing took place, most major questions already had answers. The forged signatures, the school transfers, the financial records, the false statements. The court had reviewed everything. The evidence remained consistent, and consistency mattered. Judge Eleanor Whitaker delivered her final ruling without drama. Primary custody would remain with Otis Foster. Megan would receive structured visitation rights. Financial restitution would be addressed separately. Additional concerns involving fraudulent documentation would be referred to the appropriate authorities for review. Simple, professional, final. Nobody celebrated inside the courtroom. Judges preferred dignity. Attorneys preferred caution. Life rarely resembled television. Still, the ruling mattered, because it ended uncertainty. For Luke, for Emma, for Otis. When people spent months living inside conflict, certainty became valuable, even imperfect certainty. Outside the courthouse, Daniel Brooks shook Otis's hand one last time. You did the hard part. Otis glanced toward the courthouse doors. I hired you. Daniel laughed softly. No, the attorney adjusted his briefcase. You stayed patient. That was different. And probably true. Many opportunities to explode had appeared, many opportunities to retaliate, many opportunities to make emotional decisions. Otis had wanted to several times, especially in the beginning, especially after hearing Emma's voicemail, especially after seeing the forged signatures. But anger rarely improved facts. Facts improved facts. The legal system moved slowly, sometimes painfully slowly. Yet eventually documentation spoke louder than accusations. Daniel left shortly afterward. Another case waiting, another family crisis, another chapter in someone else's life. Otis watched him disappear into the parking lot, then turned toward his truck. The process wasn't over entirely. Some financial matters remained unresolved. The fraud investigation continued. Tyler Vaughn's name appeared in several reports. Apparently he had left Wichita weeks earlier. No forwarding address, no public statements, no explanations, just gone. People sometimes disappeared when attention arrived. Tyler seemed like one of those people. Otis didn't spend much time thinking about him. There wasn't much point. The man had already become part of the past, and Otis was becoming increasingly interested in the future. A week later, Saturday arrived. Clear skies, 74 degrees, no rain, no courtrooms, no attorneys, no evidence binders, just a truck, fishing gear, and 2 children waiting near the driveway. Luke carried a tackle box. Emma carried enough snacks to feed a small army. Neither appeared interested in staying home. Milford Lake sat less than an hour away. The drive passed comfortably. Not silent, not loud. Easy. Emma talked almost the entire time. School, friends, books, movies, everything. Luke contributed less, but more than before, which mattered. Progress rarely announced itself dramatically. Sometimes it appeared as an extra sentence, an extra smile, an extra question. The lake greeted them with calm water and gentle wind. Boats drifted in the distance. Birds moved above the shoreline. The entire scene felt ordinary, beautifully ordinary. Otis rented a small fishing boat. Nothing expensive, nothing impressive. Just enough. The 3 of them pushed away from shore shortly after 9. For the next several hours, life became simple. Cast, wait, talk, repeat. Emma caught the first fish, a tiny crappie. She celebrated as if she'd landed a world record. Luke rolled his eyes, then secretly took a picture. Otis noticed, didn't mention it. Some moments deserved privacy. The sun climbed higher. The water remained calm. The conversations gradually deepened. Not forced, natural. That was always the best kind. Around noon, Luke sat in quietly near the bow, fishing rod resting against his leg, watching the water, thinking. Otis recognized the look. The boy carried questions. Eventually one surfaced. "Dad, yeah," Luke kept watching the lake. "Can I ask something?" "Of course." A few seconds passed, then, "Why didn't you yell at Mom?" The question returned. The same one from the garage. Only now it sounded deeper, more thoughtful, as if the boy had spent weeks considering it. Otis reeled in his line slowly. The lure emerged dripping from the water. He set the rod aside, then looked toward his son. Luke wasn't asking about arguments, not really. He was asking about strength, about justice, about how adults handled betrayal. The distinction mattered. Otis considered the answer carefully, because yelling wouldn't have changed the truth. Luke listened, waiting. The truth was already there. Otis glanced toward the lake, toward the calm water stretching into the distance. It just needed time. The boy remained silent. So Otis continued. "When I came home, everyone already believed a story. The schools, the neighbors, even you and Emma. Luke lowered his eyes, not ashamed, just remembering. Otis continued gently. If I spent all my energy shouting, nobody would have listened. The wind moved softly across the water. Emma sat nearby eating crackers, pretending not to listen, listening to every word. As hard as it was, I needed proof. Luke nodded slowly. The documents. Yeah. The records. Yeah. The videos. Yeah. A small smile appeared. For the first time, the boy seemed to understand the larger lesson. Not legal. Personal. The value of patience. The value of preparation. The value of letting facts speak. The afternoon passed peacefully after that. Fishing, laughing, stories, normal things. The kind of moments families build themselves from. By late afternoon, the boat drifted quietly near the shoreline. The sunlight had softened. Golden reflections danced across the water. Emma eventually leaned against Otis's shoulder. Half asleep. Luke sat nearby. Relaxed. Comfortable. At peace. A rare expression these days. Otis looked at both children. Really looked. Months earlier, he had returned to an empty house, an empty future. A voicemail asking why he didn't want them. Now those same children sat beside him. Safe. Present. Real. The journey hadn't been perfect. Some damage would take years to heal. Relationships were complicated. Trust always required maintenance. But the foundation existed again. And foundations mattered. The sun lowered toward the horizon. Orange light spread across Milford Lake. The water reflected the sky. The boat rocked gently. No one spoke for several minutes. Nobody needed to. Some moments improved when left alone. Otis sat there quietly, watching the shoreline, watching the children, thinking about everything that had happened. The deployment, the lies, the investigations, the hearings, the evidence, the patience. All of it seemed distant now, not forgotten, just smaller. Because in the end, the most important victory wasn't legal. It wasn't financial. It wasn't even personal. It was this. A father sitting beside his son and daughter, no longer trying to prove he loved them, no longer needing to. The lake stretched peacefully into the fading light, and for the first time since returning home 6 weeks earlier than anyone expected, Otis Foster felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt like he was finally home. Some people think strength is loud. They think justice comes from the sharpest argument, the biggest confrontation, or the angriest response. But stories like Otis Foster's remind us that real strength often looks different. Sometimes it looks like patience when anger would be easier. Sometimes it looks like gathering facts while others spread accusations. And sometimes it means trusting that the truth can survive long enough to be proven. Many people watching this have probably experienced some version of being misunderstood. Maybe someone told a story about you that wasn't true. Maybe you lost opportunities because others believed the wrong version of events. Maybe you spent months or even years trying to prove something you knew in your heart was true. If that's happened to you, then you know how exhausting that journey can be. But you also know that evidence, consistency, and character have a way of revealing themselves over time. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been falsely judged, misunderstood, or forced to prove the truth when nobody wanted to listen? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone else who is going through the same thing right now. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe. Tomorrow's story is another powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the one people underestimate the most.